Hi guys, and welcome back to The Social Tune. And today we're going to review one more album before the end of the year, that being Revival by Eminem.
I walk on water, but I ain't no Jesus. I walk on water, but only when it freezes.
So here's a man who needs no introduction. Eminem has been one of the biggest and most influential rappers around for about 20 years now. And even though he hasn't been in his prime for over a decade at this point, people still hold him up as one of the gods of hip-hop, one of the greatest of all time. And like most people, I'd be inclined to agree. To a point. He wouldn't make my personal top 5 of all time, and his 2000s output, with the exception of The Eminem Show, has admittedly been of lesser quality. And while I may not hate Relapse, which I think is actually still a pretty good album, his 2004 album Encore was just awful, a complete disaster with only 1 or 2 redeeming songs. But in 2009 he released the sequel to Relapse entitled Recovery, which from the title promised us a return to form. And for many, that's definitely what it was. But personally, I found it very bland, a watered-down version of Eminem who was pandering to mainstream trends at the time. No, for me, his true comeback was in 2013 with the Marshall Mathers LP 2. No, it's not as amazing as the Marshall Mathers LP, but it was a genuinely great album where Eminem was doing whatever the hell he wanted with a ton of his old energy back. So going into this guy's new album, I wondered if it was going to be a similar experience to the last Recovery of this guy's career, or if it was actually going to be something good. Well, as it turns out, this album is apparently supposed to be a sequel to Recovery, which definitely set off warning bells in my head. And those bells turned to sirens when I saw the track list, which included 19 tracks and features from the likes of Ed Sheeran and, worst of all, ex-ambassadors. So I braced myself for Recovery Part 2 and dived in. That was a mistake. If you're going into this album, you should not expect recovery level material. Hell, we're in encore territory. Because not only was this album bad, it was annoying and groan-worthy in every possible way. And as a fan of the guy, as someone whose entire family loves Eminem, this was a huge disappointment. So I guess let's get the simplest part out of the way first, Eminem and the other performers on this album.
Little one, I don't want to admit to something. If all it's gonna cause is pain, the truth in my life now we're falling like the rain. So let the river run. One night stand, turn it to nightstand. It was calm, some lights grand. Now we hung tight and
okay, so one reason why I find Recovery so bland is the general absence of the Slim Shady persona. The dark side of Eminem that allowed him to spew out any twisted thought that had ever come into your mind, yet you were too frightened to say. On this album, that persona is nowhere to be found either, outside of certain isolated moments. Framed and Offended are both horrorcore tracks that could potentially be from his alter ego, but the former has an annoying, elongated hook that got really grating, while the latter has some of the worst production on the entire album while trying to be shocking and failing. And as for Eminem himself, he's trying to be both sympathetic and defiant on this album, which ends up really clashing. Of course, it doesn't help that the vocal production across this album is terrible, with a particularly bad one coming on Offended, where he dropped into a nursery rhyme childlike flow that got really irritating. And when it's not the production, it's Eminem's own performance, as he seems to be trying to blend his flows with those of other famous MCs like Migos and Macklemore. Not to mention, he's clearly putting on voices all across this album to emphasize the tone the song is going for, rather than letting the music speak for itself. The only point on this album where he sounds genuine is on the stress-filled Walk on Water, where he's struggling with his place in hip-hop and the impossibly high expectations set for him. This is also where you get Beyoncé, who gives by far the best performance on this entire album, with a gorgeous hook that justified the entire song for me. If only the rest of our performers were as impressive. I will say that Ed Sheeran is by far the best part of River, but his hook also didn't fit at all with Eminem's verses. The two just didn't fit together. Honestly, you'd be much better off listening to Ed Sheeran's own song, Eraser. It's a much more consistent and likable song. The only other performer who impressed me was Kehlani on Nowhere Fast, even if that song is ridiculously over the top. But otherwise, ex-ambassadors are absolutely awful on the hook of the quivering and pathetic bad husband. And fuck whoever produced Alicia Keys' voice on Like Home. How dare you make her sound so anonymous? Phresher is the only other rapper on this album, and he just gets one hook. And the less I say about Skylar Grey, the better. And as for Pink, she was okay, I guess, but listening to that song just made me want to go back and listen to their other collaboration, Revenge, on her album. But of course, even the good performers are let down by weak production.
Girl's dad is a scumbag, I'm confused, because
How come you can be a loyal loser? How come you can be a liar and a good father?
Okay, even considering the fact that this is 19 tracks, the album really does run long at nearly an hour and 20 minutes. The reason being that a lot of these songs just don't know when to end, instead going on and on and on. Walk on Water is by far the best song on this album, but you could cut that last verse and hook and you'd be absolutely fine. And Untouchable is even worse, as it goes on and really doesn't know when to shut up. Hell, it's even written in the style of someone who is coming up with more stuff on the spot as he's ranting. And this wouldn't be so bad if the instrumentals weren't so painful to sit through. Once again, the piano line on Walk on Water is the best one here, but even then it's only serviceable. The rest of the time we get bargain bin, cheap-sounding trap beats on Believer and Chloraseptic, the equally cheap-sounding stock Skylar Grey production on Tragic Endings, and the demo-quality, off-kilter, high-pitched beat on Bad Husband. And that's all before we get to the sampling on this album, which is ridiculously lazy. Cheech and Chong's Earache My Eye, Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll, Regina Spektor's Human of the Year, Zombie by the Cranberries. Seriously, what the fuck? But if I'm being honest, while the production does annoy me quite a bit, it's not even the biggest issue here. No, to address that, we need to take a look at these bars.
no one's ever indicted you. Why? Because you're a
White boy, you're a rock star. White boy, in your cop car. White boy, you're untouchable.
Okay, Eminem is a rapper who regularly likes to infuse his bars with tons of punchlines. And this album is absolutely no exception. The problem is that these lines are corny and cringeworthy as hell. In the middle of a song where he's basically guilt-tripping white people for being untouchable, which is utterly basic and shallow at best, by the way, he still manages to bring up lions and tigers and bears, oh my, as well as the wonderful lyric, I'd rather hear them say die N-word than die ant-word. Really? Oh, and the terrible bars just go on and on across these songs. Your booty is heavy duty like diarrhea. Screwing our brains out like changing a light bulb. So I guess it pays to feed off of chaos, so basically you Adolf Hitler. 2 ass cheek implants, call that an ass set. You got buns, I got Asperger's. It's supposed to get grabbed, that's why they call it a snatch. I feel like I'm a bust, maybe I'm just ahead of myself. And those are just a few examples. But even putting aside all of the terrible lines on this album, the thematic arcs here are just insulting. River is a song about a wife who has been unfaithful to her husband and aborts their child without consulting him, which Eminem tears her apart for, yet still has the gall to include it with tons of punchlines and jokes. Or how the entire album starts out with Walk on Water, where he wants his audience's sympathy because it's so hard being him and always having to top himself, filled with the sound of him tearing up material that wasn't good enough, followed by an entire album that sounds like a first draft. Heck, right after that, on Believe, he actually has the balls to call out his audience, and challenges them to make sure that they still believe in him, even though the album has already taken a serious dip by that point. Or on the final tracks, where he shows himself taking pills and dying, is basically a carbon copy of what he did on Relapse. But easily the most galling moment comes on Bad Husband, where he addresses Kim and apologizes for their complicated past together. But do not be fooled, this track is no Headlights. No, instead, this is a track where he acknowledges that he's a bad husband, yet he also concedes that he's a great father. Yes, really, the hook has him contemplating how he can be a bad husband and yet simultaneously be such a legendary figure and an amazing father. Bite me! Not to mention the last verse where he tries to divide the blame evenly between the two of them. But unfortunately, it just makes me sympathize with Kim on the song. Partly because the humble brag annoys the hell out of me, partly because I've heard the song Kim and I'm not sure she could ever do anything to match that, and also because Eminem is still addressing her even though he should have moved on a good decade ago by now. Plus, even if you were to give the last verse some slack and ignore the fact that it was clearly trying to rid Eminem of as much blame as possible, the very next track, Tragic Endings, has him ridding himself of any blame and sticking it all on her, portraying his lover as an evil bitch who twists his words and gets off on his pain. Marshall, you sound like Taylor Swift from I Knew You Were Trouble. And that's pathetic. And that's the main problem with this album, a complete lack of self-awareness or any effort to take any responsibility whatsoever. Instead, we get an entire album of Eminem reminding us what a gift to humanity he is, while not even bothering to bring the bars to back him up. Even on Untouchable, he keeps bringing up ways that white people are detrimental to black people, yet he doesn't even bring up his own part in perpetuating that system like he did on other songs like this in the past, like White America. So overall, this is an album that is as bland as Recovery, except with worse production, cringier lines, and not even a shred of self-awareness. At least that album had Not Afraid and Love the Way You Lie, which are decent at the very least. This album doesn't even have those redeeming tracks. The only one that comes close is Walk on Water, and in the context of the album, that song really does leave a sour taste in my mouth. And the rest of these songs range from offensive to boring to disgusting in the worst possible way for Eminem. And as someone who considers The Eminem Show to be one of his favourite albums of all time, with the Marshall Mathers LP not far behind, this was a huge disappointment, quite possibly the biggest one in 2017. So no, I'm not going easy on this. It's an extremely light 4 out of 10. And while it's not quite his worst album, it's easily his least self-aware and his laziest to date. Go back to the drawing board, Eminem, because this is frankly inexcusable. We all know you can do better, so just do it and stop wasting our fucking time. So, that was my review for Revival. I know that this will probably annoy the Eminem stands out there, but fuck it. If you like this, you'll like anything from Eminem. Whether or not you agreed though, leave a like if you enjoyed and let me know down in the comments what you thought of this album. Also, if you have a question that you'd like to ask me in my upcoming Q&A, then make sure to go over to that video and post your question in the comments. It annoys me that we have to end the year on such a negative note, but don't worry, the negativity is only beginning, because next time, we're counting down the worst albums of 2017. So, please subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is the Social Tunes signing off.